that cannot be ascribed to a single genre.
Members of the Cash family were there for the unveiling. The singer is shown holding a Bible in his hand and a guitar on his back. That does it for today. We're back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for Tuesday, September 24th. I'm Lindsay Reiser in for John Dickerson. His last speech on the world stage, President Biden touts his legacy of service at the United Nations, why he is still hopeful despite the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. Israel and Hezbollah trade new rocket fire. Thousands have been displaced along the border as the U.S. commits new troops to the region to protect American interests in the event of an all-out war. And a memorial to a legend on Capitol Hill. It's not a lawmaker, the new statue walking the line in the halls of Congress. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Lindsay Reiser in for John Dickerson. We begin our report in Lebanon, where Israel has vowed to continue its deadly aerial bombardment against Hezbollah. The Israeli military said Tuesday it has hit about 1,500 suspected terrorist targets in Lebanon. The IDF claims one of those strikes in Beirut killed the commander of Hezbollah's missiles and rockets force. This comes just one day after the Lebanese health ministry says more than 550 people, including 50 children, were killed by Israeli airstrikes targeting the militant group. It was the deadliest attack on Lebanon in nearly 2 decades. In response, Hezbollah said it launched a series of rockets at Israeli military bases in northern Israel Tuesday. The IDF says most of the projectiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. The airstrikes have caused thousands of Lebanese civilians to flee their homes. Many residents said they received text messages and calls from unknown Israeli numbers urging them to evacuate immediately. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay is in Haifa, Israel, with the latest. Chris?
Good evening. Hezbollah fired some 300 rockets across the Lebanese border with Israel today. That's in addition to the hundreds it's already launched over the past calamitous week for them, starting with those exploding beepers and walkie-talkies, then the killing of a top commander, and now an onslaught of airstrikes from Israel. Most Hezbollah rockets and drones are intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defenses, but not all of them. We visited the town of Kiryat Bialik, which has been hammered by the Iran-backed group. We saw families and heard children just footsteps from the craters left by a rocket. Locals told us of the panic they feel each time they hear the booms and the sirens. But as a construction worker told me, we have nowhere else to go. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the Lebanese people today that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah was leading you to the brink of the abyss and warned that anyone hiding a rocket in his garage will not have a home. Lindsay?
Chris Livesay, thank you. The judge overseeing former President we are going to go to a guest now. We had lost that guest momentarily, but it appears that we have that person back. I want to bring in Faraz Maksad. He's the Senior Director for Strategic Outreach at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much, Faraz, for being here. The Israeli military says that it plans to increase its attacks on Lebanon each day. How concerned are you about a possible ground invasion?
Lindsay, very concerned, to put it bluntly. However, we're not there yet. I think we're in a stage right now where Israel is really piling the pressure using primarily its air force, but also drones and artillery on Hezbollah, precise precision attacks on its commanders, really the closest you can get to decapitation of the leadership there without actually killing Hassan Nasrallah, who is the Secretary General of the party, the very charismatic and well-known Secretary General of the party. So these are very powerful strikes. Now, thousands have left. No doubt in the coming days, it seems that we're going up the escalatory ladder, and a ground invasion is still a possibility. Most intelligence out there seems to think that if there is one, it's probably a week or 2 weeks away.
You mentioned thousands are fleeing. Where are they going?
Mostly to the north. Most of these highways are already clogged. A lot of them are actually going up to some of the mountain villages. But believe it or not, even next door Syria, that country that's been devastated by well over a decade of a civil war, you're finding Lebanese now in pure desperation, even rushing towards the Syrian border, trying to gain entry into Syria to seek refuge.
You recently wrote an article published in Time magazine, and the title is "There Are No Winners in an Israel-Hezbollah War." And in it you write, I'm going to read a quote here, "Ending Hezbollah's rocket fire and completely destroying Hamas are not realistic war goals." Can you explain?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the stated war goal here by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is actually to end Hezbollah rocket fire across that border and to bring some 60,000 Israelis who've been displaced for the better part of a year now back to their homes in northern Israel. That is unrealistic because Iran and Hezbollah have developed what is called a strategy of unity of fronts. So the Iranian-backed militias and groups from Lebanon, from Yemen, from Syria, from Iraq have been attacking Israel in support of Hamas and the Palestinians in Gaza since October 8th, the day after the October 7th attacks were carried out. It is very unlikely that Iran and Hezbollah are just going to completely give that up and give up essentially their Palestinian partners in Gaza and Hamas. So this will have to go back to some kind of a diplomatic outcome, a diplomatic solution. And my sense is what the Israeli prime minister here is doing is bloodying Hezbollah and really trying to blunt that Iranian ring of fire that Iran has built around Israel in all these various countries. So not really the goal here being the return of Israelis to their homes, but really taking the fight to Hezbollah and Iran in a sort of Mexican-style standoff that's going to be with us for quite some time.
Faraz Maksad, thank you for joining us. The judge overseeing former President Donald Trump's federal election interference case has handed special counsel Jack Smith a win. The judge today granted Smith's request to file a 180-page brief on presidential immunity. It is expected to include new evidence in the case. Smith faces a Thursday deadline to file his opening brief about how the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity applies to the former president's criminal case. Trump's lawyers had opposed the request. Former President Donald Trump hammered Vice President Kamala Harris on the economy during a speech in Georgia today. If elected, he says he will cut the corporate tax rate, says the country will have a manufacturing boom, and plans to, quote, take other countries' jobs.
Georgia and Savannah are going to be right in the center of the action. We're going to rebuild our manufacturing, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen fast and beautifully. For years, Americans have watched as our country was stripped of jobs and wealth, and our companies were sold off to foreign countries. You've been watching, and it's been a horror show.
Harris is expected to unveil new economic policies of her own Wednesday. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now. Scott, what is former President Trump's strategy focusing on manufacturing in this moment, and how is he weaving through the idea of how tariffs, which have been criticized by some, how is he sort of weaving that into the message of how that would benefit voters?
Oh, he's synthesizing it into so many parts of his campaign messaging on the economy, including manufacturing. And he's bringing that argument to areas where manufacturing is king. He was in Indiana, Pennsylvania last night. He has more stops expected in more battleground states where manufacturing has a big foothold. Making the argument today, though, is that tariffs and, in his argument, drilling and producing more domestic energy has the prospect of generating so much money you can pay down the national debt and help families get better jobs and get better pay. Making that argument despite the fact that U.S. energy production is at all-time highs right now already. But he's trying to press the issue of the economy. And watching his remarks today in Savannah, Georgia, he did spend a larger proportion of the remarks on some form of economic message. A little more, though not perfect discipline on message today, Lindsay, which is important because his advisors and his fellow Republicans here in Washington say he's doing more effective work when he pushes the issue of the economy and gets less caught up in unrelated and personal attacks.
Vice President Harris has gained some ground in our polling among voters who say the economy is a major factor in their vote. But I think it's interesting that she is planning another economic speech. Is this sort of in response to what voters are saying? We want to hear more?
That's going to be in Pittsburgh. No surprise she'll be there in Western Pennsylvania, being such a critical area in such a critical state. the issues of the economy are so broad, it's hard to just talk about them without getting into details, or you're really not saying much of anything. She has been specific, talking about child tax credits to help people with child care, grocery prices, we talked about price gouging. Getting into more specifics helps gain ground on the issue of the economy because it is so sweeping, it is so large. You're really not making inroads with voters if you talk about it at a macro level. And I think what you're hearing from Donald Trump when you talk about tariffs is a lack of specificity that his team may want to try to refine. The more you talk about the kitchen table issues, the things that drive people, their jobs, their food bills, their gasoline prices, I think the more impactful these messages can be. And we know this, Lindsay, because we hear congressional candidates and we see their advertising and messaging getting into the more granular details of the economy. That's what I'm watching for with Vice President Harris tomorrow in Pittsburgh.
When it comes to Harris, though, she says often she is all about the opportunity economy. And yes, she has talked about some specific policy proposals, such as expanding the child tax credit, building more starter homes. But do you also find that she needs to do some refining, or that aides are telling her that she needs to be more refined with her messaging on the economy as well?
We noticed she opened that debate, the presidential debate against Donald Trump. One of the first arguments she made was about a small business tax credit to infuse more small businesses, which also helps lean into a life story about how she has connections, visceral, with small business owners. And that's something she'd like to press in the days and weeks ahead. But some of this bandwidth has got to be dedicated to other issues. And our latest reporting is that it's possible she makes a southern border visit on Friday during her battleground trips to the Southwest. So you have to save some bandwidth for the other things that are driving voters. And we know immigration and economy are both drivers right now.
An issue that our friend Finn Gomez says she might need to do some political jujitsu on. Scott McFarland, thank you. As a reminder, CBS News will host the only vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz on Tuesday, October 1st in New York. We will have live coverage on CBS, CBS News 24/7, and Paramount Plus. The son of the man suspected in the second assassination attempt on former President Trump was arrested Tuesday. Orrin Ruth is facing 2 federal charges for possessing and receiving child sexual abuse material. Authorities searched Ruth's home in connection with an ongoing investigation unrelated to child exploitation. Local law enforcement and FBI sources tell CBS News that Ruth is also facing state criminal charges for possession of cocaine and drug paraphernalia. Orrin Ruth's father, Ryan Ruth, has been charged with federal gun charges related to the attempted assassination of Trump. Florida is under a state of emergency as Tropical Storm Helene heads for the state. Helene formed Tuesday morning and began making its way through the Gulf of Mexico. It's expected to impact Florida as a hurricane by the time it makes landfall Thursday. Evacuations have already begun in some areas, and officials say the storm could knock out electricity for some residents for a week. CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bajorquez joins us now from Clearwater, Florida, with more. Manny, what exactly is Helene's path, and what kind of conditions is the state bracing for?
Well, when it becomes a hurricane, it could go up to Category 3, and it would be hitting at this point, according to the track, several hours north of us near the Big Bend area of Florida. But what concerns officials with this storm is not just the intensity. Yes, where the eye wall hits could be pretty bad, but also the sheer size of the storm. And what does that mean? That the outer impacts, including storm surge, heavy rain, and the wind even could impact a much larger area, like the very populated area where we are right now in Pinellas County, Tampa, St. Pete, and Clearwater Beach, where we are right now. So evacuations are very limited at this point. Officials here in Pinellas County have announced a mandatory evacuation for residents in long-term health care facilities in Zone A. That affects 2 hospitals, 14 nursing homes, and 10 assisted living facilities. Now, even though they want to get people out of those areas, and the general public still does not have mandatory evacuation orders, they're asking people to keep an eye on updates from officials, because especially tomorrow, if they need to start issuing those, that's when it may happen.
It's such a beautiful day behind you. Are you talking to folks about how they're preparing?
You know, there are a lot of people here who are clearly vacationing or enjoying their time on the beach, but I did hear people in the elevator of the hotel already talking about having to try to get out ahead of the storm because flights are already being canceled in advance of the storm. So those are the kind of things that are happening, at least where we are right now, in a more touristy area near the water. But in residential areas, you can imagine that people are starting to prep, starting to get stuff up from low areas on their houses and potentially pack up to start to evacuate. The 5 to 8 feet projected for this area, you know, it may not be bad if you're very far away from the water, but in neighborhoods that are water adjacent, you could have street flooding, and that's going to create some problems.
All right, important warnings there. Manuel Bojorquez in Clearwater, Florida. Thank you. Coming up, President Biden makes his final address to the UN General Assembly, reflecting on his 50 years in public service and expressing optimism. His message amid multiple wars abroad. Plus, a new investigation into overseas scammers who use psychological manipulation to ensnare vulnerable Americans. CBS News senior national correspondent Jim Axelrod will join us to explain. You're streaming The Daily Report.
These are the stories of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America, weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
This year, we shared a story about the growing epidemic of overseas online scammers robbing vulnerable Americans. We now have an update on the billions of dollars being taken. Jim Axelrod spoke with a woman whose elderly mother lost her life savings despite pleas, she says, for her bank to take action. Banks say they're limited in what they can do.
I'll never forget, there was a message on my phone.
Hello, I'm calling with Charles Schwab with the Financial Crimes Investigations Team.
This was 6 months ago.
The message for Leslie came from Charles Schwab, where her mother had an investment account.
They just mentioned large transactions and wire transfers, and did I know what was taking place?
And you didn't?
No, I didn't.
Leslie, who asked we only use her first name, was discovering her mother was one of tens of thousands of Americans being scammed by criminals overseas this year. These scammers pretended to be IT experts from the government who told her mom her computer had been hacked and convinced her to take money out of her account to buy gold, which they said was a safer investment.
I didn't talk to my family about it.
Especially insidious, the scammers told Leslie's mom, Ruth, to keep all of this secret.
Well, I wanted to tell them, but I thought that the government would punish me, and I didn't want them to get into trouble, anybody that I told.
Leslie was a trusted contact on Schwab's paperwork, and the firm had her ask her mom about what was going on.
We said, where is the gold? Is it in your apartment? Is it in a safety deposit box? Where is the gold? And she wouldn't tell us.
Heartbreaking. CBS News correspondent Jim Axelrod joins us now. First, let's start with what Charles Schwab is saying.
So what they're telling us is they wouldn't do an interview, but they wanted to emphasize that it's very difficult when you get into the business of telling a client they can't do what they want to do with their own money.
So essentially they're saying, look, if you call us and you want to take your money out, you want to wire it to somebody, it's not our place to say, what's going on? Well,
they're saying that, let's say, for instance, they stopped somebody from accessing their own money and they wanted to put it into a perfectly legit investment that would then bear a lot of return. Then who's on, if the customer comes in and says, you didn't let me make money I wanted to make, they want government backing. Schwab and other large financial institutions, they want the government to say, no. You can step in and do this if you have reason to believe that some customer is at risk.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are you learning in your investigation into the role of banks, and how is the government getting involved?
Well, Lindsay, at the top, you said we had done this investigation earlier this year. That had to do with romance scammers, and we looked at the dating platforms because that was the last stop between scammer and victim. This time it's the banks. They're really the last line of defense between scammer and victim. So while I lay out to you that some banks don't want to get too involved, there are other banks. We went to a credit union in Iowa, for instance, where their tellers are trained in how to discuss and interface with customers when they come in and suddenly their withdrawal pattern is different than what it has been. They're taking large sums when they usually haven't. They are trained to then not only ask them, but go into the file and see if there's a trusted contact. You call a family member and maybe say, hey, look, are you sure you want to do what you're telling us? And do you realize, trusted contact, that your father, mother, uncle, aunt is asking to take these large sums of money? They also have working relationships with the local police department. And sometimes somebody with a badge can make someone understand they're being scammed more than, say, a daughter or a son can.
Fascinating. This investigation obviously is multifaceted. Many members of the CBS News team working on it. What are some of the big takeaways you want people to walk away with?
I think we're going to be able to give viewers a look at something they haven't seen before. Deborah Pata, the distinguished correspondent in Africa, has gone into a boiler room in Ghana where these scammers make it happen, where they are bilking these hundreds of millions, billions of dollars from Americans, and actually confronts the scammers and have them explain why they do what they do. It is riveting television. You'll see it on the CBS Evening News. You'll see it on CBS Mornings, and I'm sure you'll see it right here.
That's a tease. Jim Axelrod, thank you so much for joining us. President Biden delivered his final address to the United Nations General Assembly in New York Tuesday.
Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people.
President Biden also called for an end to the Israel-Hamas war, reiterated support for Ukraine, and highlighted the dangers of artificial intelligence being used for malice. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has more on Tuesday's events at the UN.
Lindsay, this was President Biden's last speech before the United Nations General Assembly because next year he will not be the commander-in-chief when all of these foreign leaders gather here at the United Nations headquarters. And so while he wanted to address all of the things that are ongoing that the U.S. is attempting to tackle, including the conflicts in Sudan, Ukraine, and the Middle East. But when it does come to trying to help end those conflicts, the president called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, saying that it was time to finalize the resolution that the United Nations Security Council actually passed back in June. He also said that nobody would benefit if the tensions in the Middle East were to escalate and that the time to end the war is now. With regard to Ukraine, we know that President Zelensky is going to make a speech tomorrow, and we expect that he will be asking for even more support from the U.S. And President Biden said that now is not the time to grow weary. It is not the time to turn away from Ukraine, urging more support as it continues its fight with Russia. And so the president delivered this morning, and it remains resonating throughout this gathering here as various world leaders are still reflecting on what the president had to say. Lindsay?
Weijia Jiang, thank you. Later this hour, we will have more analysis on President Biden's final UN General Assembly speech and his message to the world. The CEO of the drug company that makes Ozempic and Wegovy was on Capitol Hill Tuesday. At issue, the high costs of the diabetes and weight loss drugs in the U.S. compared to other countries. When pressed about a lack of access to these drugs, the CEO of Novo Nordisk put the blame on insurance companies and called for a wider discussion with other U.S. drug manufacturers.
I don't think any one company can solve that alone. I wish there were more at the table today so we could have a discussion about how we do that together. We don't decide the price for patients. That's set by the insurance companies. I do acknowledge that there are patients who have poor insurance or no insurance.
Novo Nordisk has set prices for both Ozempic and Wegovy significantly higher in the U.S. than in foreign countries. Earlier this year, the Senate committee found that Ozempic costs nearly $970 monthly for Americans, while it can be found in Canada for $155, or take a look at your screen, just $59 a month in Germany. On the heels of that hearing over diabetes and weight loss drug prices, new data from the CDC shows the nation's obesity rate has not increased for the first time in more than a decade. Results from a federal survey conducted between 2021 and 2023 estimate about 40% of adults in the U.S. are obese. That's down from nearly 42% in 2020. The CDC defines adult obesity as having a body mass index, or BMI, greater than or equal to 30. The survey also shows no significant differences in obesity between men and women. However, severe obesity rates are still on the rise. The Justice Department targets Visa. Next, the antitrust allegations and what it could mean for the credit giant. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate. acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Back to the Daily Report, I'm Lindsay Reiser. Here are some additions to our top stories. Israel says it killed a Hezbollah commander after it launched dozens of new airstrikes into Lebanon Tuesday. Meanwhile, Hezbollah launched a round of missiles at Israeli military bases, but Israel says most were intercepted. This comes a day after Lebanese officials say more than 550 people were killed in Israeli strikes. Ukrainian authorities say at least 3 people were killed and more than 30 injured after a Russian strike. Guided bombs hit a high-rise apartment block and bakery in the city of Kharkiv. The northeastern city has been a regular target for Russia since the start of its war. Those conflicts overseas were among the topics President Biden addressed in his final speech to the United Nations General Assembly Tuesday. Biden said, quote, "Even from the horrors of war, there's a way forward." Zeke Miller joins us now for more on the UN General Assembly from Washington. He's a White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Zeke, President Biden reiterated his support for Ukraine in his address, and he and Vice President Harris are scheduled to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky Thursday. What can we expect from those meetings, as well as Zelensky's address Wednesday?
Really, Biden's effort to organize the Western coalition to support Ukraine against Russia's invasion is an indelible part of his legacy. We'll hear that time and again. We heard it from David from President Biden. We'll hear it going into that meeting on Thursday. But so much of that story remains to be written, and it's largely dependent on the outcome of the election in November. And that's sort of the, what we heard a little bit from President Biden before the UN, and we'll probably likely hear more of that on Thursday, that American support for Ukraine will never abate and will never subside, except it really is in some ways at stake in the election. There are 2 different visions for American foreign policy at stake here, and particularly when it comes to Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky is obviously going to try to make the case publicly to the American people, like he has in every U.S. visit he has made, why it's important for that support to continue. One of the things that my colleagues report is that he tried to arrange a meeting with former President Donald Trump, and a campaign official told one of my colleagues that meeting is not going to happen. But really, I mean, it is an opportunity for President Biden to do a little bit of legacy building here. But at the same time, so much of that legacy will be determined in November.
Will that legacy also be determined on whether a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is achieved?
It's certainly, a challenge for President Biden, as he's tried to argue that, domestically that the world is a better place than it was 4 years ago. And by a lot of metrics, it is. But when he's at the UN today, he's speaking at a world that is far more turbulent, far more chaotic than it was even a year ago when he last spoke, which was before the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. We heard some fairly strong language from President Biden calling for a ceasefire and a hostage deal like he has been. But White House officials and U.S. officials more broadly have been saying that they are running out of hope that this can be accomplished. The dynamics on the ground, the conditions for reaching a deal, which had seemed a lot more promising even just a few weeks ago, don't seem to be so rosy, so optimistic now. And now you have the expanded front on the north in Israel with Hezbollah and Lebanon. So it is a lot more turbulent. And that for President Biden is a real challenge as he tries to message to the American people and the world and to the history books, really, about the significance of his presidency. Some of these things were in his control and some of these things weren't. But presidents are judged by how they handle crises, and he has to make the case that he handled it as well as he could.
Well, the president did strike an optimistic tone. You had UN General Assembly Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who really had a stark warning. Let's listen.
Geopolitical divisions keep deepening. The planet keeps heating. Wars rage with no clue how they will end. And nuclear posturing and new weapons cast a dark shadow. We are edging towards the unimaginable, a power keg that risks engulfing the world.
Does the rest of the UN share his concerns?
It's certainly something that we've heard from some of the other leaders who have spoken at the UN thus far, and those private conversations, diplomatic conversations. It's something that we've even heard from the U.S. government, from President Biden and others, that even with the expansive U.S. and Western coalition helping Ukraine, you've seen Russia, Iran, China draw closer together over the last several months and years. That is an element of what the Secretary General was talking about, though he took a slightly slightly more dispassionate view of that and sort of assessing the general global situation. There's a lot of speculation talk about a return to the Cold War. It's not the Cold War. It's a different sort of dynamic. But there is certainly this realignment on the global stage that's happening, a factionalization happening, and that poses a challenge for American leaders. And whoever replaces President Biden on January 20th will have to live in that new world and how to navigate that, just like all of those other world leaders who've been gathering in New York this week.
Zeke Miller, thank you.
Thank you.
The Justice Department is suing Visa, accusing the credit card business of reaping big profits by shutting out rival payment processors and passing costs to consumers. The Justice Department's complaint says Visa earns a fee for each debit payment it processes, but the company also penalizes its customers when they try to use rival services, which may charge a lower fee. The complaint argues more than 60% of debit transactions in the U.S. now run on Visa's debit network, allowing the financial giant to amass more than $7 billion each year in processing fees. For more, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, the DOJ says Visa is extracting fees that far exceed what it would charge in a competitive market, and those costs end up getting passed on to consumers. I'm a student in your classroom. What does that mean?
So basically what that means is some version of, imagine you are a renter and suddenly it becomes really expensive for landlords. We charge landlords a lot more in property taxes. The landlords aren't going to just eat that extra cost. They're going to pass it on to the tenants. In this case, the analogy is true in a different marketplace. And so what the Department of Justice is arguing, just as you laid out, is that Visa is doing two things. Basically, they're making agreements with existing merchants and banks that are unfair to these merchants and banks. They're saying, you better use us and you better use a certain volume of business with us when it comes to these debit transactions. But then they're also, with respect to potential competitors, really boxing them out by, in some ways, making partnership agreements with them and therefore taking them out of the market, preventing them from being competitive players in the market. That means that Visa gets to set these transaction prices. They charge the merchants more than they otherwise could. The merchants aren't going to just take those fees and eat them. Again, they pass it on to the consumers. That's you, that's me. That's 60% of people in the US who make transactions when it comes to these debit transactions on Visa's payment system.
Yeah, my ears perked up today when A.G. Garland was talking because he said Square, and I do a lot of transactions on Square if I'm at the farmer's market buying an ear of corn or a cup of coffee. So essentially, Visa is charging, they're in an agreement with Square, essentially preventing them from being a legitimate player. But also the merchant is paying these fees. And of course, the merchant isn't going to just say, okay, I'm going to lose that 30 cents. Your latte is now 30 cents more expensive.
That's exactly right. Your corn, your spinach, fill in the blank of what happens to us who are lucky enough to have great farmers markets nearby. The vendors themselves can't absorb all these costs or don't absorb all these costs. So to take a step back, when I talk to my students about antitrust laws and anti-monopoly laws, they're designed to protect consumers. They're designed to protect consumers by saying, let's let competition flourish. Because we know if there's really only one or two players in a marketplace, they get to set the price. They're going to charge as much as they possibly can. And those charges are eventually going to trickle down to us. And so part of this suit is about saying, allow more competitors. That will reduce costs, and it will allow consumers to reduce the amount of fees that they ultimately pay either directly or indirectly.
More than 60% of debit transactions in the U.S. conducted using Visa's network. We will continue to follow this lawsuit. Jessica Levinson, thank you.
Thank you.
Appalachia High School in Winder, Georgia, reopened its doors for students Tuesday, less than 3 weeks after 2 students and 2 teachers were killed in a mass shooting. Students experienced an increased police presence during their first day back. Counselors and therapy dogs were also made available. The hallway where the shooting occurred is expected to remain closed for the remainder of the school year. 14-year-old student Colt Gray was charged with 4 counts of murder for the shooting. His father also faces charges that he allegedly gave his son access to the gun. A student at Gettysburg College in southern Pennsylvania has reportedly left the school accused of scratching a racial slur into another student's chest. According to NPR, the student is no longer enrolled at the college, but it's not clear whether they were expelled or decided to leave. A campus investigation revealed the incident occurred on September 6th during an informal off-campus gathering for the swim team. At least 2 students were suspended from the team following the investigation. Upper-class students from the swim team first reported the incident. In a statement, the college's president said, quote, "No matter the relationship and no matter the motivation, there is no place on this campus for words or actions that demean, degrade, or marginalize based on one's identity and history." NFL Hall of Famer Brett Favre has told congressional lawmakers he was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The former Packer, Jet, and Viking was appearing before the House Ways and Means Committee for a hearing on welfare accountability. You may remember Favre's alleged involvement in a scandal that diverted millions of dollars in state welfare funds to powerful people in the state of Mississippi. The former Pro Bowler is not facing any criminal charges and has denied any wrongdoing. He said the Parkinson's diagnosis may have been caused by concussions suffered during his playing career. Gun policy remains a top concern for voters ahead of the presidential election, but it's something that will appear only on one state's ballot this election season. We'll tell you why after the break. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS. the justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels. 100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door. This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We have breaking news. The Justice Department has confirmed that Ryan Ruth is being charged by federal prosecutors with the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. On Monday, a federal judge ordered Ruth to remain in jail until trial. The decision was made after prosecutors revealed the 58-year-old wrote a note several months ago detailing his plans against Trump. In addition to a charge of attempted assassination of a presidential candidate, Ruth faces federal firearms charges related to the incident at Trump's golf club in Florida on September 15th. Ruth is expected to be arraigned on the new charges next week. Recent CBS News polling shows that gun policy is one of the major factors likely voters are considering when voting for president. But on a state and local level, initiatives on gun policy are nearly non-existent on ballots. According to the nonpartisan nonprofit newsroom The Trace, Colorado is the only state with a gun-related initiative on its ballot this election year, despite the fact that initiatives were proposed in 6 other states for November, but ultimately failed to make the ballots. We're now joined by Jennifer Massia, a senior news writer at The Trace, who has extensively covered gun policy and community violence. Thank you for being here. I want to ask you, in your reporting, which states saw progressive gun measures like implementing red flag laws or universal background checks that failed to make the ballot, and why?
So this year, considering gun policy is in our lives every day, I mean, it's just one report of a shooting after another, and there is strong support for stronger gun laws. But this cycle, we saw a number of attempts of gun rights measures to get on ballots, far more than gun reform measures. So we saw, and all of these failed. We saw in Missouri, several initiatives look to replace laws that had recently been stripped, like permitless carry, expanded background checks, the ability of cities to set their own gun laws, which is very important. A lot of cities do not have the power in this country to set gun laws that are stronger than what the state sets. So several initiatives in Missouri look to rectify that. All of them failed. None of them were able to get signatures by the deadline. We do have, though, 3 initiatives on the ballot in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, localities also do put gun reform measures on the ballot. The problem here is that there is a state law in Tennessee like I just said, that localities cannot set their gun laws. So they're looking to put measures on the ballot that reinstate the concealed carry permit that was lost in 2021. Somebody can just carry a gun around with no permit and no training in Missouri, one of 30 states. And that conflicts with Tennessee state law. Now, the city council put this on the ballot. The state AG basically called this a waste of time because eventually, and he's probably right, it's eventually going to get struck down in court. So, but interestingly, the gun rights measures that were proposed in several states also failed. And most of them are swing states, Michigan, Arizona. So it seems that there was very little success on any front this election cycle, which is rare. Usually there's at least one measure on the ballot.
And Jennifer, you mentioned more gun rights initiatives versus gun reform. Did those also fail because of a lack of signatures?
They did. This is a very high stakes election. So there were a lot of get out the vote efforts that may have just absorbed, these are all volunteer staffs that are collecting signatures. So it's very possible that they were absorbed into other efforts, and this just wasn't the year. There were several states, Colorado, Arizona, that sought to reinstate gun possession rights for people with medical marijuana cards because of federal law. You can't own a gun and be a marijuana user. And those are actually also not unpopular with progressives, those measures. Both of those failed. In Washington, several gun rights measures failed. Washington is a solidly blue state. But one would have prohibited a state registry of gun owners, which is very important to a lot of gun rights people. Another would have codified the right to buy guns for self-defense. And another would have repealed the semi-automatic rifle ban. And I spoke with the person who sponsored that one. And he said in solidly blue Washington, there were people who actually ripped petitions up in his face.
Wow.
It is politically unpalatable in some states, if you're a red state, to put forward gun reform proposals, and if you're a blue state, to put forward gun rights proposals.
Sounds like Colorado, the only state in which there will be a ballot initiative related to this issue. Jennifer Messia, thank you.
Thank you.
Another New York City official is stepping down, this time the city's schools chancellor, who happens to lead the largest school system in the nation. David Banks announced his intention to retire Tuesday, but he says he made the decision earlier this year. The home he shares with his fiancée, who serves as the city's first deputy mayor, was raided by federal authorities on September 4th. Several of Mayor Adams' administration officials have resigned in recent days. Banks' retirement will take effect on December 31st. Attention Kmart shoppers, why the blue light special will soon be fading to black. The Daily Report is back after the break.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Is closing its last big box store in the U.S. next month. Employees at the Bridgehampton Commons Mall on Long Island, New York, say the location is set to shutter on October 20th. The only remaining Kmart in the States will be a smaller store in Miami. A few stores in Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands will remain open as well. Speed puzzlers have been battling for the win at the World Jigsaw Championships. The annual event attracted 3,500 of the best puzzlers from around the world. Competitors worked individually or in teams, all for the chance to be crowned champion. This year's individual title winner took just over 37 minutes to complete a tricky 500-piece puzzle of tigers and vegetation. It took me days in the pandemic to finish a puzzle. With a guitar slung across his back and a Bible in hand, the man in black has arrived to the Hill. A bronze statue of Johnny Cash was unveiled at the U.S. Capitol Tuesday. The Cash statue is the second new figure to represent the state of Arkansas. Cash is replacing James P. Clark, an Arkansas senator and governor who was a white supremacist. Also representing the land of opportunity, Daisy Bates, a prominent civil rights leader and journalist in Arkansas. Her Capitol statue was unveiled earlier this year. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. President Biden takes the stage at the United Nations General Assembly for the final time. Takeaways from his address as the escalating war intensifies in the Middle East. Plus, one of the biggest issues at the center of the 2024 election, the economy. How former President Trump and Vice President Harris are differentiating themselves on the issue. And romance scams prey on people's hearts and their wallets. An update to a CBS News investigation from earlier this year. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
Of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabled